The process of electing the president is one of the most poorly understood in American politics, though the mechanics are relatively simple. The process consists of two phases, the nomination phase and the general election. The single most significant feature of these phases is that they are both representative processes. This means that at no time do ordinary voters cast ballots for a presidential candidate directly. Instead, voters cast their ballots for people who are politically committed to vote for that candidate at the appointed time. The nomination phase consists of a series of state-by-state Democratic and Republican Party primaries and caucuses. The nomination phase culminates with the party's national conventions. The most important function of the convention delegates is to formally nominate the party's presidential and vice presidential candidates. The primaries and caucuses are the means by which the parties select delegates to their respective conventions. It's very difficult to generalize about this phase of the process because it varies significantly from state to state in any given presidential election year and from one presidential election year to the next. The primaries and caucuses are governed by the laws in each state. Additionally, the rules of the Democratic and Republican parties differ. In the final analysis, however, whether the voter is aware of it or not, he or she is actually casting a ballot for delegates who say they support the candidate. While some critics maintain that the potential exists for the delegates to disregard the outcome of the primary or caucus votes, the fact that over the last 8 election cycles the party's nominees have been apparent long before the delegates convene, much less cast their votes at the conventions, suggests that the primaries and caucus votes do effectually determine the party's nominees. Once the candidates have been nominated by their party's conventions, the general election campaign begins. Actually, in recent presidential election cycles, the general election campaign begins even before the parties have officially nominated their candidates. Once it becomes clear who the parties will nominate at their conventions, the Democratic and Republican Party candidates begin to actively campaign against their opponent. For example, in the 2016 presidential election, we knew several months before the Republican Party's national convention that Donald Trump would be the party's nominee. We also knew that Hillary Clinton would be the Democratic Party's nominee in advance of the Democratic National Convention. Similarly, in the 2020 presidential election campaign, we knew that Donald Trump would be renominated by the Republican Party and that Joe Biden would be the Democratic Party nominee several months ahead of the Democratic National Convention, which you will no doubt recall was a socially distanced, electronically conducted convention due to the coronavirus pandemic. At any rate, my point is that whereas there was a time when the general election campaign began upon the conclusion of the party's national conventions, in recent history, the general election campaigns really get underway before the conventions, as soon as the party's nominees have been effectively determined by the primary and caucus voting. The campaign runs until Election Day, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. That means Election Day could be as early as the 2nd of November if the month begins on a Monday, or as late as the 8th of November if the 1st of November falls on a Tuesday. For example, in 2020, the first Monday in the month of November falls on the 2nd, so Election Day will be Tuesday, November the 3rd. In the general election, ordinary voters across the country stream into the voting booths to cast their ballots for their preferred presidential, vice presidential tickets. However, voters in each state are actually casting their ballots for a slate of electors who technically elect the president and the vice president. The electors meet in their respective state capitals in December to cast their votes. All but 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, award their electoral votes according to the unit rule. The unit rule is the practice of awarding all of a state's electoral votes to the presidential vice presidential ticket who won a plurality of a state's popular vote. The number of electoral votes allotted to each state is equal to the number of representatives the state has in the United States House of Representatives, plus the number of senators each state has in the United States Senate. Whereas each state has 2 senators, the real difference among the states is determined by how many representatives each state has in its House delegation. So the arithmetic is fairly straightforward. California has the largest population of the 50 states and therefore has the largest House delegation. It currently has 53 representatives in the House. So 2 senators plus 53 representatives means that California has 55 electoral votes. Texas has the second largest population and thus the second largest House delegation. Texas has 36 representatives in the House. So 2 plus 36 equals 38 electoral votes. New York and Florida each have 27 representatives. So 2 plus 27 means that both states have 29 electoral votes, and so on. The least populated states in the country, Alaska, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Vermont, and Delaware, each have 3 electoral votes. Simple arithmetic allows us to conclude that since each state has 2 senators, each of these states must also have 1 representative in the House. The District of Columbia is not a state, it's a federal city, so it has no congressional delegation. That is, the residents of Washington, D.C. have no representatives or senators in Congress. However, the 23rd Amendment was added to the Constitution in the early 1960s, giving the district the number of representatives equal to the least populated state, so D.C. has 3 electoral votes. It is very important to remember that this formula, 2 senators plus the number of representatives a state has in the House, is just a formula for determining the number of electoral votes each state is allotted. The electors are not the senators and representatives themselves. If that was the case, that would mean that the president would be elected by Congress, which would render a very important component of the separation of powers moot. Separation of powers means that each branch of government is independent of the others. If the president was elected by Congress, that would mean he or she would owe his or her office to Congress, and that would make it very hard for a president to be truly independent. In fact, Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution prohibits members of Congress from being appointed as electors. So now we know the formula for determining how many electoral votes each state has. And since we know members of Congress cannot be appointed as electors, we will talk in just a bit about who the electors actually are. To understand the politics of the Electoral College, it is also important to know 3 straightforward facts. First, how many electoral votes there are in total, that is, all states combined. Second, how many electoral votes are required to elect a president. And third, what the unit rule means. Let's take each in turn. First, the total number of electors is 538. This is determined by the same formula as we indicated for individual states. There are 100 senators in the United States Senate and 435 representatives in the United States House of Representatives. So adding the 2, we get 535 electors. How do we account for the other 3 electors? Remember, Washington, D.C. also has 3 electors. That gives us the total of 538. On the second matter, the United States Constitution requires that a candidate must win a simple majority of the 538 electoral votes to be elected president. A simple majority is 50% plus 1. So half of 538 is 269 plus 1 equals 270. Candidates, therefore, organize and run their campaigns in an effort to secure at least 270 electoral votes. Keep that point in mind. We'll return to it in a few minutes. Third, the unit rule means that the presidential, vice presidential ticket that wins the plurality of the popular vote in a given state receives all of the state's electoral votes. In other words, the electors from that state vote as a unit. So if the Democratic Party ticket wins a plurality of the popular vote in California, all 55 of the electors from that state will vote for the Democratic Party's presidential, vice presidential ticket. If the Republican Party's ticket wins a plurality of the popular vote in Texas, the state's 38 electors will vote as a unit for the Republican ticket. That process is followed in each of the other states: Florida, New York, North Dakota, Wyoming, and so on. Maine and Nebraska are exceptions to the unit rule, however. In those two states, 2 electors are awarded to the ticket that wins a plurality of the popular vote statewide. An electoral vote is awarded to the ticket that wins a plurality of the popular vote in each of the state's congressional districts. Maine has 2 congressional districts, and Nebraska has 3. So theoretically, it is possible for Maine's electoral votes and Nebraska's electoral votes to be split, each party's ticket receiving 1 or more electoral votes from either of these 2 states. In the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton won the statewide popular vote in one of the congressional districts in Maine, receiving 3 of the state's 4 electoral votes. Donald Trump won the popular vote in the other congressional district, so he won 1 electoral vote from Maine. Similarly, in 2008, the Republican ticket won the statewide popular vote in Nebraska, receiving those 2 electoral votes from the state. It also won the 3 congressional districts, and the Democratic ticket won the popular vote in the other congressional district. The Republican ticket won 2 of the 3 congressional districts from Nebraska, and the Democratic ticket won the popular vote in the other congressional district. So the Republican ticket of John McCain and Sarah Palin won 4 of the 5 electoral votes from Nebraska, and the Democratic ticket of Barack Obama and Joe Biden won 1. Maine and Nebraska aside, knowing that all of the other states use the unit rule goes a long way in helping us understand the politics of the Electoral College. More specifically, it helps us understand how each party's presidential, vice presidential ticket campaigns. Each campaign devises a strategy that it believes is most likely to result in at least 270 electoral votes. The campaign has determined which states it has a realistic chance to win a plurality of the popular vote in. There are some states that will predictably vote for the Republican ticket, and others that will just as predictably vote for the Democratic ticket. Pluralities of voters in Idaho, Oklahoma, and Alabama very predictably vote for the Republican ticket. In fact, each of the states on this map that are in some shade of red are fairly certain to vote for the Republican ticket. Pluralities of voters in California, Illinois, and New York, and all of the other states that are shaded blue, are very likely to vote for the Democratic ticket. Applying this pattern to the 2020 election, if we add up the electoral votes from the states shaded red, the total for the Republican ticket of Donald Trump and Mike Pence is 125. Adding up the electoral votes from the states shaded blue, the total for the Democratic ticket of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is 232. Since the outcome of the popular vote in the red-shaded and blue-shaded states is fairly predictable, we begin to understand why the Republican and Democratic tickets would spend most of their time and money resources in the so-called battleground states, or toss-up states. These states are shaded gray. These are the states where the race is competitive. Either ticket could conceivably win the popular vote in each of these states. The campaigns spend the overwhelming bulk of their resources campaigning in these states. Why would either campaign spend time and money in California, New York, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, Alabama, or Idaho if the outcome of the popular vote in each of these states are effectively predetermined? They are going to spend their relatively limited resources in states where the outcome is in question. Most of the battleground states are perennial toss-ups. Texas, however, is new to the ranks of the toss-up states. The popular vote in Texas has been won by the Republican ticket in every presidential election since 1980, and it may be so again in 2020. However, polling data indicates that preferences expressed by likely voters in Texas for the 2020 election make it too close to call at this time. Before we proceed to examine what might happen in the battleground states in the 2020 election, let's take a moment to address the question about who the electors are. Consistent with Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, the electors from each state are appointed in a manner devised by the legislature of the state. We already know that 48 of the 50 state legislatures have determined that the unit rule will be used. But it is a bit too complicated to leave it at just that. After all, can the electors, once appointed, not vote for whichever candidate they want to? Well, in 29 states, legislatures or political parties have attempted to bind electors in one manner or another to do so. However, in most cases, the penalties for not doing so are relatively minimal. Most constitutional scholars argue that electors remain, as a practical matter, free agents. Even so, the incidence of the so-called faithless elector is rare. In the 14 presidential elections from 1960 to 2012, a total of 7 electoral votes were cast in a manner that was inconsistent with the popular vote in the state from which the elector was chosen. Simple multiplication tells us that over 7,500 electoral votes should have been cast during those 14 elections. 538 electoral votes times 14 elections equals 7,532 electoral votes. With only 7 electoral votes deviating from the popular vote, that's less than 1/100%. That means that the faithless elector has historically been a rare occurrence indeed. In the 2016 election, a whopping total of 10 electoral votes deviated from the state's popular votes from where these electors were appointed. But the 2016 presidential election was unusual in a number of respects, owing primarily to the unconventional nature of the Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. Leaving the 2016 election aside, why is the occurrence of the faithless elector so rare if there are no real penalties imposed by the states for an elector casting his or her ballot in a manner that deviates from the state's popular vote? There are 2 main reasons for this, I think. First and foremost, I think the fact that the electors are chosen by the state's political party that wins a plurality of the popular votes. To be a bit more precise, each political party that has a presidential, vice presidential ticket on the ballot in a state selects a slate of electors in the event that its ticket wins the popular vote. If its ticket wins the popular vote in the state, its electors cast the electoral votes for the state. For example, we have previously established that California has 55 electoral votes. Consequently, the California Democratic Party selects a slate of 55 electors, and the California Republican Party selects a slate of 55 electors. If the Democratic ticket of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris wins the popular vote in the state as predicted, the 55 electors selected by the California Democratic Party will go to its state capital, Sacramento, in December to cast their 55 electoral votes for the Democratic ticket. If the Republican ticket of Donald Trump and Mike Pence win the popular vote in Oklahoma as expected, the 9 electors chosen by the Oklahoma Republican Party will go to Oklahoma City in December to cast their 9 electoral votes for Trump-Pence. Now, what do you suppose is the primary qualification for being selected as an elector by the California Democratic Party or the Oklahoma Republican Party? These are people who generally take their pledge seriously and can be trusted to vote as they are expected to. They are likely party activists who want to vote for their party's candidates. I suppose some might say they are party hacks. That verbiage seems a bit too contemptuous and dismissive for my usage. I'll stick with party activists. But my point is that these are people who, in the overwhelming majority of cases, want to vote for who they are chosen to vote for. There's a second reason the faithless elector is so rare. They do not cast secret ballots. We know who these people are. Remember, electors are chosen because they are thought trustworthy to perform this task. If they violate that trust, they will never be trusted again, most likely, by either political party. I know it sounds odd, but this is one of those things in American politics that works largely because the electors are trustworthy. Most of the time, electors who deviate from the popular vote in their states do so for a specific reason. Consider the example of an elector named Barbara Lett Simmons, who in the 2000 presidential election was chosen by the Democratic Party from Washington, D.C. Lett Simmons should have cast her vote for the Democratic ticket of Al Gore and Joseph Lieberman. Instead, however, she abstained, didn't cast her vote at all. When she was asked by the news media why she didn't, she replied that if it would have made a difference in the outcome of the election, she would have. But since it did not make a difference, she abstained, so that reporters would ask her why, and she could use that as a platform to make the case for statehood for Washington, D.C. You see, D.C. is not a state, and therefore has no representation in either chamber of Congress. She believed it was fundamentally unfair that over 500,000 Americans have no representation in Congress. There are actually some very interesting stories you can read, if you are interested, about these deviant votes that were cast by electors. The Fair Vote website provides some pretty good, if not brief, accounts. Just Google faithless elector, and then click on the link to the Fair Vote website. Okay, let's finish by using what we have learned to do a little prognosticating about the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. The website 538 uses statistical models to forecast outcomes for everything from sports contests to election contests. As you can see here, they simulated the 2020 presidential election 40,000 times. They have determined that Joe Biden wins in 86 out of 100 contests. But let's take a closer look at the election on a state-by-state basis using the Real Clear Politics website. Recall that we previously indicated that if each ticket wins the states they are predicted to win relatively easily, the electoral vote counts would be 232 for Biden and 125 for Trump. Notice that states that are toss-ups account for the remaining 181 electoral votes. Let's examine a few of these states more closely. As of October the 24th, polling data in Pennsylvania suggests that Biden is more likely than Trump to win that state. It's close, though, and there's a little over a week to go before Election Day, so things could change. But let's put this one in Biden's column. Next, let's go to Ohio. Wow, it's really close there, less than 1 percentage point separating the candidates. So let's move to Wisconsin. Wisconsin seems to be leaning towards Biden. But just as in Pennsylvania, it's still pretty close with a week to go. Let's assume this one stays or remains in Biden's column. On to Minnesota. The polls are showing Biden ahead there too. Let's put that one in Biden's column. So you can see that Biden has surpassed the requisite number of electoral votes. But let's finish this off. Next up, Iowa. Polls are showing Iowa is really close. Let's leave Iowa as undetermined. Over to Nevada. Polls show Biden with a 5.2 percentage point lead. Let's put that down as a Biden win. Arizona's pretty close. Let's move to Texas. The Quinnipiac poll is the most recent available, showing a dead tie in Texas. Polls from late September and early October showed Trump ahead. So the Real Clear Politics average indicates a 4 percentage point lead for Trump. Let's put Texas for Trump. Given the state's history as being a solid Republican state, that doesn't seem too unreasonable. Georgia's too close to call. North Carolina's pretty close too. We'll leave those two gray. So, why does 538 forecast a likely Biden victory? Well, you can see that it certainly appears to be leaning that way. As I said, though, there's still a week to go. Who knows how much things might change in a week's time? If you want to play around with possible outcomes, there are a number of websites that provide interactive maps that allow you to do so. Again, this one is on the Real Clear Politics website. Okay, to finish up this presentation, let's talk for just a few minutes about the possibility that one candidate might win the national popular vote and the other candidate win the electoral vote. Despite the fact that this outcome has happened twice in the last 5 presidential elections, in 2000 and 2016, the probability is pretty low, as indicated by the 538 website. There is less than a 1% chance that Donald Trump will win the popular vote but lose the electoral vote. It's a little higher that Biden will win the popular vote but lose the electoral vote, but it's still only about a 9% chance. It is interesting to note, though, that in both the 2000 election, where the Democratic candidate was Al Gore, and the 2016 election, where the Democratic candidate was Hillary Clinton, both won the national popular vote but lost the electoral vote, meaning that Republicans George W. Bush and Donald Trump were elected president. I suppose that's why many Democrats believe that the Electoral College favors Republicans and want to abolish it. Indeed, President Trump's tweets clearly seem to believe that the Electoral College favors him or Republicans generally. Despite this unlikely outcome, the fact that it has happened twice in recent history means that we should consider what it means. Let's say it happens again in 2020. Does that make the result illegitimate? In a constitutional sense, the answer is no. The constitutional process would have been observed. No one would have been cheated. The Constitution does not provide for the direct popular election of the president. It doesn't even provide for a popular vote. So if somehow it happened in 2020, however remote the actual probability may be, everyone can relax. The whole system will not collapse. The president, the candidate who wins at least 270 electoral votes, could assume his office, and the nation could rest comfortably in the knowledge that the White House was not taken in a coup d'etat. The president would have been elected as the Constitution prescribes. In the American political system, where the rule of law reigns supreme, constitutionalism will once again have triumphed. Now, I'm no fool. I know why many people worry about this outcome. Many people already believe that their vote does not count. When one candidate wins the national popular vote and the other candidate wins the electoral vote, it seems to reinforce that belief in many people's minds. But your vote does count. To understand that point, You have to be willing to stop thinking about the national popular vote totals and start thinking about the popular vote on a state-by-state basis. Your vote helps determine which slate of electors, the Republican Party's electors or the Democratic Party's electors, will cast their electoral votes. It matters in Texas if you vote, particularly this election, in which the polls are showing such a tight race. Keep telling yourself, I need to have my say on the question of which party's electors will cast the state's 38 electoral votes. Say it again. I need to have my say on the question of which party's electors will cast the state's 38 electoral votes. Again, I need to have my say on the question of which party's electors will cast the state's 38 electoral votes. You don't have to be a really huge baseball fan to understand this analogy. Imagine a 7-game World Series. In Game 1, the National League team wins 4 games by the scores of 2-1, 1-0, 3-2, and 4-3. The American League team wins 3 games by the scores of 10-1, 8-2, and 7-1. Which team is the World Series champs? If you said the National League team, you are correct because they won 4 games, as the rules of baseball require. But what if I was to protest, arguing that the American League team should be champs because they outscored the National League team 31-14 over the 7 games? Would you agree that the championship should be awarded to the American League team? Most baseball fans would balk at that suggestion. Did you notice I used a baseball term, balked? Most fans would think it proper to crown the National League team champs. So if it happens, so long as the state-by-state results are valid, we need to remind ourselves that the Constitution has been observed. One predictable outcome would be that it would be likely to lead to proposed constitutional amendments being introduced in Congress to abolish the Electoral College. Average Americans could rest comfortably in the knowledge that their representatives in Congress would be working to agree or guarantee that the will of the people would never again be thwarted. Alas, the prospects of such a proposed amendment is less likely than the likelihood that the winner of the national popular vote being one candidate and the winner of the electoral vote being the other happens. Remember, constitutional amendments require extraordinary majorities in both chambers of Congress to be formally proposed at the state level to be ratified. Why would Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, Vermont, or Delaware support an amendment that would diminish their outsized influence in the election of the president? Finally, the 2000 and 2016 elections aside, the effect of the unit rule, historically, has been to magnify the national popular vote. That is, the candidate who wins the popular vote wins the electoral vote by an exaggerated margin. For example, in 1996, Bill Clinton received about 49% of the popular vote, but won 375 electoral votes, 70%. In 1992, Clinton received only 43% of the popular vote, but 68% of the electoral vote. In 1988, George Bush won 53% of the popular vote, but 79% of the electoral vote. Ronald Reagan won 51% and 58% of the popular vote in 1980 and 84 respectively, and 91 and 97% of electoral vote totals in those years. Some scholars argue that this is a significant benefit of the Electoral College, provided the votes are cast according to the unit rule. Relatively small margins of victory in the popular vote can be translated into mandates to govern with electoral vote landslides.